What it do, bruh? Talk of the town, Nintendo, Doc Trey, still holding it down, still make the best games, and you know this, bro. It's the truth. If you don't like it, you can have that seatbelt. Alright, so as predicted, Retro Studios has finally decided to talk about some of the back history regarding the development of Metroid Prime 4. And this interview was done with Famitsu and translated via machine learning by a member at FamiBoards. So this is a machine learning translation. So you need to bear that in mind initially, at least, because it's a machine learning translation of a Japanese interview. It may not be one for one, 100% exactly what they are saying. So that's something to keep in mind there. So, but this is what we have to work with for now. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm not going to go over this whole interview, but I'm going to go over some things that are of interest to me, especially concerning things that I've said about this game. So it says, please tell us about the development process for this title. It says the project began when we received a development request from Nintendo of America. They asked us to create a numbered entry, a mainline title in the Metroid Prime series. We aimed to create a game that preserved the essence of Prime while also delivering new experiences. Simultaneously, we wanted to center the story around the relationship between Samus and Silex, something we had planned to explore in a future title. So that's something that, if you played the end of Metroid Prime 3, it's something that was already kind of set up. Now it says, what were the most challenging aspects and points you focused on most during the long development period? It says, the project changed development companies midway, and we had to restart at Retro Studios. So if you guys remember, the game was originally in development from Namco's Bandai Namco's Singapore studio. This is something that I found a long time ago. A lot of people try to say, oh, it was never confirmed, blah, blah, blah. It's confirmed, okay? Now, they don't straight out say Namco's name here because they're not going to throw them under the bus. And two, Nintendo literally just bought this studio. The studio that was originally working on this game, Nintendo literally just bought them a few months ago. So obviously, they're pretty good. But maybe, just maybe back then, what the progress that they were making on Metroid Prime 4 wasn't up to what they expected out of the title, and they handed it back to Retro Studios. Now it says, however, Retro Studios didn't have the infrastructure in place to develop a Metroid Prime title at the time, so we had to start building that foundation. So pretty much what they're telling you is, when Nintendo of America went to Retro Studios to build Metroid Prime 4, they did not have a big enough team ready to do that. So they spent a lot of time hiring people in preparation. And it says, additionally, we outsource background models and cutscene creation. Producing background data alone required numerous subcontractors. So if you guys remember, a long time ago, I told you guys that this game was going to have its environments heavily outsourced. So that's them confirming that. It said, this involves selecting those companies initially and managing them throughout. Our progress management staff were incredibly helpful in balancing both schedule and quality. We're grateful to them. We're also thankful to the many studios that created the data. The key point we focused on was getting new staff to understand our production philosophy. It took time for them to grasp that we weren't just making a game, but building a player experience. So pretty much they're telling you that it took a while for the additional development teams and the people that they outsource to understand what it's like to make a Metroid Prime game, and also understand what Nintendo expects out of a Metroid Prime title. That's why you probably saw over the years Still hiring for this. Still hiring for this. This is why people were like, when is this game coming out? It's because they were continually hiring and hiring and hiring for this game. And it's sounding like they spent a lot of the time hiring people rather than actually really developing the game. Okay, so it says, it's been 18 years since the last numbered title. Were there any changes you made consciously? Were there any changes you consciously made to reflect the times? And it says, at the start of the project, perhaps due to the influence of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, we saw a lot of comments on the internet saying we want to play an open world Metroid. They did? Anyway, it says, however, Metroid's core element of increasing the amount of explorable areas by unlocking powers is not very compatible with the freedom to go anywhere from the beginning of open worlds. Thus, we thought to design a limited area that could be freely explored and have that be a hub that could connect to the other areas. Then we thought that if one could move around on a bike in a satisfying way in that area, it could be a segment that mitigates the tension from exploration and paces the whole game. Now, here's a part about the interview that people seem to be getting mixed up here. Saw a lot of people reading this. They're like, oh, see? We got those crappy bike sections in open world because Namco did it. That was Namco's fault. If you read what it says here, that wasn't Namco's idea. It was Retro's idea. It was their idea for the bike. It was their idea for the open world sections, or the semi-open world. It says, in the end, the game took much longer than expected to finish, and we realized that players' impressions towards open world games had changed. What they're talking about is, back then, I guess a lot of people were like, oh, let's make this open world, let's make this open world, let's make this open world. But as we've seen that not all games and not all genres work in open world, a lot of people were like, well, maybe not. And Retro saw that. But by the time they saw that, it was too late. And they said, that being said, development had already been reset once before when we started again from scratch with Retro Studios. So backtracking development again was out of the question, and we were resolved to move forward with our original vision. Our original vision. So they're telling you, the open world thing, the bike thing, that was Retro's idea. And what they're telling you here is that they thought about scrapping that, but it was non-negotiable because the game was already behind schedule, or it already had been restarted, and they didn't want to restart the game yet again. So they just proceeded with their original plans. Okay, it said, during this time, shooting games and action games went through evolutions with an increase in game speed in particular. But taking in those changes would have made it difficult to construct the tempo of an adventure game, so we actively decided not to take them into account. Therefore, I think this game is pretty much divorced from the changing times. So again, another factor that they were considering changing of the game, yet the game was too far in development and had been restarted, like they said, and that was a no-go. Now, there's more to talk about here, but I'll let you guys read the rest of that interview for yourself, because that's all I kind of wanted to talk about in this video. Look, we're already at 9 minutes here. So, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of people reading this interview or saying they read this interview, and is immediately dragging Namco through the mud. Oh, see, the reason this game isn't all that I hoped it to be, it was all Namco's fault. No. Okay? The main thing you guys are complaining about, Retro just told you right here, that was their idea. And a lot of people are saying, oh, yeah, it's because they they were shoehorned to their old ideas, and they didn't have time. Like, didn't have time. They had 6 years. The time that they had to develop Metroid Prime 4 is 3 times the amount of time that they had to develop Metroid Prime. Now, it's not the same thing as back then because today's games take longer to develop. They take more people to develop. They take more money to develop. This time, Retro had to make this game with 4K textures in mind, HDR support in mind. So it's gonna take much longer. But they still spent a long time making this game. And I don't think it's right that people are assuming that everything that they don't like about this game came from Namco. Also, while they were not able to start everything from scratch, it also shows another thing that I was telling you guys. I didn't think there was any way that Nintendo would let Retro scrap completely every single idea that Namco had, especially when they spent like 2 years developing, they spent all of this money. I'm sure that quite a few ideas from the original project have seeped into the final version of Metroid Prime 4. Like, there's no way that they let Namco work on this project for 2 years with 0 good ideas. Like, that's impossible. But again, don't solely blame Namco for this game not being what you wanted it to be, especially when Retro is telling you that the main thing that you're complaining about was their idea.